Greetings, adventurous travelers and fellow keepers of the lake. How are you all doing? Welcome back. I've had the pleasure of having a bunch of my friends GM for me over the last couple of months, and I found that I was giving the same feedback to all of them. So after we went through the list and debated it a bit, I figured out that maybe it could actually be useful to other people as well. So here we are. These are small system agnostic mistakes or things that you can improve in your games that really make a difference. That is a very YouTubey way of saying it, but I really think they do. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the matter. The first thing that I gave as feedback is people use too many descriptions. You use descriptions as a way to buffer your thinking process. So you would start talking about something, and as you're thinking or improvising, you will add more and more descriptions or even repeat the old ones as your brain is slowly getting to the next thing. But you have to keep in mind that everything you say is gonna get a function. If you mention a table and a wardrobe in a room, players are naturally going to want to interact with that table and that wardrobe. So if you're adding more and more descriptions, you're kind of giving your players choice paralysis, and some details that you mentioned at the beginning of your description are gonna be lost. It is completely natural for you to start with describing the environment. There are stone walls, there is a certain smell in the room, but you don't need to go into describing what the bricks look like, because the players will want to touch the bricks. You don't go into describing how this room seems to have been used, because that is something that your players might want to discover on their own. It is very useful to divide your descriptions in between player interactions with things, so you don't describe the table as soon as they enter the room. You just mention it, and then when someone approaches the table, that's when you explain what is on the table. This is also why that flavor text that you read out loud in the modules exists. So you just read that and you let the players explore further, and you will notice if you look at those texts that they are really condensed. They are just a couple of sentences. On the other hand, if you're not a native English speaker, you probably didn't even use this text, or you need to translate it so that you can read it in your own language. But it is a good guideline on how you should approach describing things. And while on the topic of describing things, I've seen that a lot of new GMs really like describing empty hallways, and this is for two reasons. One is because they also serve a purpose of like a buffer while you're describing to your players that they've gone left and then taken the next right and blah blah blah. You're actually buffering the next scene. And the other reason why I think people do this is because you as a GM have a need to translate what you're seeing on your map to what the players are experiencing as accurately as you can. But this is one of those situations where it doesn't necessarily mean that your players are gonna be more immersed. If you have someone making a map, for example, and this is one of the mechanics of the game, yeah, sure, then go for it. But if you're just narrating that they are leaving one location and going to the other, then you don't need to describe all these hallways. If you're describing them, there should be something special to them. So instead what you do is you write the name of the location, the name of the room that your players are currently in on one piece of paper. This also helps with players knowing where they are in the whole space. So now your players want to leave this room and go to the office. You don't describe all the hallways that are in between. What you do is just say you leave the bedroom, and after a couple of twists and turns, you go down the stairs and enter the office. And I really do place papers like this, index cards with location names, on the table because it decreases confusion. For example, if one player stays at the bedroom and the other is in the office, now you actually have a visual representation of that. Now, if someone is in the hallway and it's an empty hallway, regardless if it's the staircase or one of those turns, you just put another index card there and okay, one player is now traveling to the bedroom. Another cool thing to do with hallways is if you end up describing them, make sure there is something interesting about them. Maybe they're full of pictures of the person whose, I don't know, house or castle this is. Maybe there are some hints on these pictures. Maybe there's a hidden door. The hallway might be alive, or it could change its length. Maybe it's magical. Or an infinite hallway. You know those horror movie tropes where a character is running down the hallway but the hallway becomes longer and longer. Yeah, that sort of thing. So staying on the topic of descriptions, there is a problem that I call this guy, that guy problem. And that is when GMs get so immersed into running the game that they forget that players can't really see what the GM's mind is focusing on. So a lot of new GMs start just describing, oh, this guy does this thing, that guy does that thing, or when they're talking to players, they use like, you see this, you see that. And if those are two different groups, if someone is like drawing on the paper or snacking, they're not gonna see the visual cue of the GM's hand pointing at someone, and they're gonna hear, you see this and that, and the player might start to think that it was referring to them, and this is where a lot of confusion can arise. So if you have guards in the room, always say one carries a spear, one carries a sword. Now you can refer to this one as the spear guard and this one as the sword guard, or give them names. Same goes for player characters. If they are in different rooms, always refer to those characters by names. And also, when describing the rooms, you don't go room 1, room 2, you say bedroom and office. Especially in the situations like this, have the index cards, have some discernible detail, like for example replacing the blue guard with the red one, so when you're describing things, everybody knows what place you're referring to, what person you're referring to. That is one of the most important jobs that the GM has, to make it clear to everyone what is happening. Confusion ruins immersion. That sounds like a slogan, and it should definitely be your slogan. So I will mix things up a bit right now. Let's talk about the perception of the passage of time when it comes to GMing, and that sounds really fancy, but honestly, if you have been a player for a long time and you switch to GMing, you will feel that time passes differently for you now. You feel like everything is happening very fast as your mind is processing things very swiftly and you're in the details and everything, but whenever you make a pause to grab something or read a paragraph, you feel like ages are passing by and everyone is judging you, so just relax. Everything is gonna be fine. It's not a big deal. Remember when your GM was reading descriptions? You didn't care, you made a joke with others around the table, you had fun, you grabbed some snacks, it's all good. If you feel like your pacing is off, you can rush your players to do something, but never do it outside of character. Never do it like, hey guys, we need to hurry up. No, this is very bad for immersion. What you should do is have some strange stone beings jump into the room, maybe the wall bricks become alive and start chasing the players down the hallway, maybe then a part of the hallway collapses and they have to take the right turn. Now they're in the location you wanted them to be. So you can always do something like this, or you have to learn to kill your darlings. If there is not enough time to finish it as a one-shot and you really need this to be a one-shot, well, you have to skip a part of it. Just take out the middle part, throw them right into the climax, and then after the climax, let them cool off a bit, have a little outro, and you can be sure that the climax and the outro can fill in maybe even 2 hours without a problem. So yeah, learn to kill your darlings and remove a part that you really thought was cool, but you don't have time for it. You're the only one knowing that you did that, so you might feel like they are missing some content, but the players don't know about it and they don't really care. They just want to have a conclusive story happen, and that's what you're providing. Now, one thing that I really saw new GMs struggle with when it comes to this difference in perception of time is narrative breaks. So what is a narrative break? This is a term from literacy, I think, but it is really useful for us GMs, and that is anything that breaks the narrative in a way. So all the descriptions, setting up a map for an encounter, and I've seen my friends that are new to GMing prepare all these cool things that they never use because they are afraid to take a break and let the silence swallow the room. We had situations where it is very clear that initiative should start, but they are trying to solve everything with just opposed roles and still be in that roleplay moment, and what ends up happening is everyone gets confused. Who is acting? When are they acting? Same goes for maps. It is very tempting for a GM to go into theater of the mind, but if your group is not experienced with this or you have a lot of actors, you need to provide some visual context to everyone. Even using the technique from Index Card RPG that I showed earlier, where you have little index cards with just drawings of, I don't know, pillars, locations, items, something to put the miniatures on to give context. It doesn't need to be a one-to-one representation. You don't need to print out a battle map. You just need to have a couple of cards and distribute things so everyone is on the same page. Don't be afraid to take a break and prepare for the next scene. This break and the tools you have are there to make sure that everything in the next scene runs smoothly. I think that everything that we described so far can be addressed by just listening to the players, and if you hear any confusion brewing on the other side of the GM screen, immediately stop everything that you're doing, draw stuff on the table, and explain what is happening, explain the situation, make sure everybody is listening. So let's go to the next one. Players should always have an alternative way to succeed, even if that is something that you never anticipated. Now, it is a big topic of, are you running things as a simulation? Are you trying to be the best you can in simulating the world, and you know where every guard is and every NPC is, and you're tracking everything? Most of the time, even if you're doing something like that, your core responsibility as the GM is for everyone to have fun. Even if something that you've written down doesn't really add up to what the players are expecting, maybe you should let them try it anyways and see where the story will end up. So let me explain what I mean by using an example from our previous game. This was sort of like an embassy that our players infiltrated by pretending they are there to gamble for a certain artifact. The embassy expected these group of gamblers to come, and our players figured out that that is their way in. So they said, "We are the gamblers." Now, they ended up hiding in this room when they were discovered by the original gambler and his friend, that is some shadowy being thing. So the shadowy being thing disappeared into the wall and they defeated this original gambler. Now they wanted to leave the embassy, but their only exit was blocked by a ton of guards that were escorting one of their friends. And this ally to the players was incapable of beating all of these guards because they were missing their weapon. And their weapon was very powerful, and they could pretty much solve the situation by getting this ally's weapon to them. So the weapon was a fan, like, for cooling and stuff. So the shadowy figure came through the wall and said to the players, "Please don't hurt my friend gambler, and I will give you the fan." The players have witnessed this shadowy figure pulling two guards into the walls previously, so they figured out, okay, if you help us get out of here, we are not gonna hurt your friend. The shadow then continued to insist, okay, I will give you the magical fan to give to your friend, and then he will solve the problem, but just don't hurt my friend. What the players did is they started to blackmail the shadowy thing and insist that it should just pull the guards through the walls or escort them through the walls. The problem here is that the GM didn't really allow for anything useful to come out of this. They really wanted the fan to go to the players and then the ally, and then for the situation to be resolved. So after a lot of persuasion and a lot of rolling, one of the players was teleported by the shadow person outside into the courtyard, solving nothing. This person couldn't do anything now, and it is even harder for this person to solve the whole thing. They have the fan, but now it doesn't feel like the players have accomplished anything. In my mind, the moment that they started blackmailing the shadow, that is the solution that the players came up with, and that is a valid solution. Doesn't matter if the fan is gonna be delivered to the players or not. If the shadow can just take all of the guards into the walls and clear the path, that is the solution. Then they can figure out what to do with the ally after all the guards are gone. And the same goes with puzzles. If you're designing a puzzle as GM, you should be open to different interpretations of the puzzle, even if the puzzle is very simple. If someone has a creative idea, they've sat down and thought and rolled some dice and succeeded, and you see their eyes light up and they are sure that they've got it, the worst thing you can do is actually say, nah, no, sorry, you have to try again. It doesn't feel rewarding, and that engagement then feels like unnecessary. So let's talk about the next thing, and that is music. I think every new GM struggles with handling music while they're running. There is so many things that you're doing. Who has time to even think about music right now, right? So if you followed this channel before, you know that I have a couple of videos going over soundboards and how to design a musical landscape for your game. And honestly, if you're new, don't click on the soundboard video. I'm making an upgraded version of that is much more accessible to everyone, not only Windows users. And I really recommend you check the music video that I made. It is kind of advanced, so if you just want something that goes in the background and you don't think about it, I propose you find longer soundtracks. So if you find a movie that is of a similar vibe to what you're running, you can use the whole soundtrack. Just be sure to cut out the actiony bits or the sad bits and use those in appropriate situations. But it is much harder to craft a playlist that you just run and then a lot of songs go on shuffle and these songs might not match in their vibe. So find a long one. You can type the name of the game you're playing and then just soundtrack. There is a ton of playlists for D&D, fantasy, Call of Cthulhu, horror, modern stuff. People have already solved this problem, so just find something that works for you. Ideally, this music will blend with the background, so no words, no amazing solos or anything like that, because you want your players and their actions to be what is in the foreground. When we ran our game Redmark, oh yeah, there it is, and it is a modern psychological horror game, so we took the soundtrack from Hellraiser and we had some soundtracks from Mr. Robot. And a very important pro tip is music should always be a bit lower volume than what you as the GM think. Especially if that speaker is in front of you or under the table, you won't hear how loud it is for the players. So turn it down, and if you see that music and players' voices are kind of on the same level, then decrease it even more. Okay, that is music, so let's go to the next one, and that is making set piece locations for your game. My advice here is don't create locations inside your fictional cities, inside your dungeons that have nothing in them. Everything that you describe communicates to the players that they should explore. If you say there is a tower in the distance and the players wish to visit this tower, they should find some interesting challenges and puzzles and maybe loot in that tower. Them going to the place is their way of saying, we want something to happen, we're searching for engagement, and then you as the game master respond. Even if there is nothing inside, just make it a very tense atmosphere. You hear some sounds, things that you saw on the floor disappear after a while. Just make it interesting in any way you can. Even if they don't find anything, they're gonna feel like there's some mystery around it, and then even if they go outside, after a while you can figure out what was the thing causing the mystery, and then after a couple of sessions say, aha, all the clues lead back to the tower. And then now when they go and explore it, they have some preconceived idea of what they're gonna find there. Maybe you confirm those expectations and they find the creepy tower again, or you can subvert those expectations and say the tower is renovated, very nice, there is a lot of happy people living inside, that sort of thing. This is taking so much longer than I anticipated, but we're discussing wonderful things about our hobby and I really hope you're enjoying it so far. So with that, let's go to the next one. And it wouldn't be a top mistakes GMs make video without mentioning roles. And of course you have the classic mistakes the GMs make that everybody talks about, and that is locking meaningful things behind the die roll. So soft locking your story by just saying, okay, you can't find an envelope under the drawer without rolling a successful perception roll. I wouldn't say that is a good thing to do. Mostly I would say you find an envelope anyways, but your roll doesn't give you any information about it and it's empty. So now you need to get it to someone who knows what to do with it. Maybe you sense a little bit of magic there, so someone else needs to translate it or find the hidden text in it for you. But that roll is like giving you additional information. It's not soft locking you from even finding the envelope. Do not hide meaningful things behind the roll. The second thing is, do not roll for things that don't have any uncertainty tied to them. I entered the room, what do I see? Can I roll perception? No, you see, you have eyes, you can see what's in the room, you don't need to roll perception for that. I'm a rogue that spent all their life lockpicking regular locks and now we're stuck in front of a villager house that has the most basic lock ever. Can I roll to lockpick it? No, you just lockpick it. You've done this a million times. You can even do it with your eyes closed. The third thing would be, Don't let the players pass if there is uncertainty, just because you need them to succeed at this to push things forward. Find another way to do it through the story. If there is uncertainty and you let them do it without them rolling for it, or you give a very big bonus for it without reason, then the players will feel like nothing can stop them. So when uncertainty arises, you have 4 results that you can interpret as the GM. You have a critical failure, you have a failure, you can have a different flavor of this failure that is called fail forward, you have success, and you have critical success. It might seem that you have 3 potential failures and 2 success states, but that's actually not true. Failing forward is when your players fail a die roll, but you want them to feel like they've succeeded at something, so you say they accomplished the task, but there are some complications. I always like to give the example of you're breaking into a house or a warehouse or whatever, and you're rolling to see if you manage to do that. You fail. You still open the door, but now it can't be closed anymore. It is wide open and anyone that is passing by can see that it's open. So you postpone the consequences in a way. So in scenarios that I mentioned where you really want players to progress, well, don't let them pass without a roll, but when they fail the roll, you can still do the fail forward thing. Another thing that you should always have in your toolbox, and if you're playing Pathfinder or D&D, this is something that you already are familiar with, but in other games this is also useful, and those are saving throws. This is where you turn things around. It's not the players trying to do something and you asking for a roll, it's the world trying to do something and players rolling to avoid it or get an upper hand in it. It is really useful for a lot of different scenarios. I might even do a whole video about it. Subscribe if you want to see that. A little plug, little plug. So let's look at the example with the warehouse. The player wants to lockpick the warehouse door and enter, and you're afraid that they might fail at it, so you say, roll me a reflex save. At this point, the door swings wide open. Something pushed the door open, but the player is rolling to see if they dodge out of the way or are hit by the door. Who opened the door? What happened inside? You don't need to know that stuff right now. You'll figure it out as the time goes, but you're not only removing the obstacle in front of the players, you're still giving them a die roll to feel like they are accomplishing things, and you have introduced something that makes the atmosphere a bit creepy. And the last thing when it comes to die rolls, don't allow dogpiling. To explain what it is, let's look at the same example. One character wants to picklock the door, fails. The other player says, my character wants to try as well. They also fail. The third one starts asking if they can do it. The GM says, okay, this door is clearly hard to lockpick, but sure, there you go. And then character that never lockpicked a single door rolls a nat 20 and they professionally lockpick the door, while the rogue of the party is just looking at them. Matt Colville has a good video on this, and there is an insert in Crown and Skull about this as well. The verdict, I will link all the things in the description, but the verdict is, if the door cannot be lockpicked with the first roll, you can't do it. This door is just beyond your capability, the lock is too advanced. Go find another way in. That is one way to do it. The other is, if you have a rogue that, as we already said, can lockpick the lock, they don't need to roll for it. Now, timers. You will find yourself in situations where you're struggling to know when something should happen. For our concrete example, you remember the embassy that we had? Well, we had a timer that represented how long we have until all the alarms start beeping, and this was not represented with like a real-world timer or a die timer. It was just like, hey guys, time is ticking, you need to hurry up. That is very hard to track, and it takes a lot of brain power and could be confusing for the players. Whatever the scenario that takes some time is, players need to do something until the alarm sounds off, until reinforcements arrive, until the gate opens, until the hacking is done. You should always use a real-world timer. You either use a timer die or you use some form of a real-world timer, such as an hourglass or a clock. Anything will do. Now, let's first look at the timer die. If our players are stuck in this room, as in the previous scenario, and they have to figure out the way to go outside, but their path is blocked by some guards, for example, and stuff is happening here, well, you might say, after 1d6 rounds, because you're probably in initiative at this point, right? You say in these 6 rounds you will have the alarm go off and a bunch more guards will just storm the whole thing. Okay, you might say that this timer can fall on 1. What do you do when it falls on 1? Well, you can say you have 1 round to figure stuff out, or you can reroll on a 1. It is up to you completely, but if you want to learn more about dice timers in general, I will link Runehammer's videos on this. I think Runehammer is the master of timers and you really need to check out those things. That is where I learned all of this. But let's go back to this situation. In these 6 rounds, something bad is gonna happen. So our players go outside, they do some things, and then the enemies do some things, and this timer ticks down. And this is just a regular D6, you can just replace it with any old D6. And they are trying to strategize how to leave in this many rounds. It is not realistic, it's not simulating the real passage of time, but it is mechanical, and that is what timers are for. They are there to cause tension, to cause people to strategize and think fast, so they are not intended to be realistic. On the other hand, if you want players to be able to do as many things as they can in a certain time, make that tension even bigger, you can replace this with an hourglass. For example, this hourglass gives players, I think, a minute and a half. A minute and a half is very little. Now, if you have a bigger party, you would make this timer bigger. Maybe use a clock or put a timer on your phone or something. We say you have a minute and a half to exit this location or the guards will storm. Now, all the turns have to happen really quickly. No thinking on your turn what you're gonna do. You all have a minute and a half, so you will see players start to panic and just, I do this, bam, bam, bam. And when it's GM's turn, then stop the timer. Just put it like this, stop it, because it's not fair for your turns to be subtracted from the player's timer. The last thing I'm gonna talk about, and I'm gonna keep it really brief, is splitting the party. Everybody says don't split the party. Splitting the party is horrible. You will have to think about so many things. Players will have to wait for their turn for a long time. Honestly, I think you should let the party split. Always. It is not a problematic situation. Let's say half of the players wants to go shopping, the other half wants to go and hunt some rabbits for their hide or something. At this point, the GM becomes like a movie director. You decide what will happen in a certain scene and how to divide the screen time between these two groups. And this is something that we really deeply explore in our game that we are working on right now. I will put the links for that in the description as well. I always say that in action movies and other movies, you can notice that as soon as something meaningful happens in one scene, regardless if it's a success for the heroes or a failure, the camera moves to the other part of the group. Let's say the ones that went shopping, they start to haggle. Their haggling fails. We go and look at the players that are hunting the rabbit. Now they jump with the bag onto the rabbit, they think they've got it, they roll, they failed. Okay, back to the haggling. The haggling succeeds, they get their gear and they are leaving. Now, as they leave the shop, we go back to the rabbit chasing scene. The characters try to fire an arrow at the rabbit. They succeed, they catch the rabbit. Now the two parties meet. It sounds very fast and very hectic the way I explained it right now, but these scenes can last easily 10 minutes of your playtime, and it's completely fine. One part of the group will wait for 10 minutes, while the other does something that you consider being meaningful enough to switch the scene to these ones. And with that we come to the bonus round, and I only have one thing in the bonus round, and that is, you will think that your game sucked, or you will think that it wasn't good enough, that it could be better. You saw all the little holes that you kind of handled, you know. But don't worry, your game was probably much better than you think, so don't let it get to your head. It's only normal, and if you feel anxious and like stage fright before the game, that is because you care. After the game, ask for stars and wishes. If you don't know what that is, I will also include some materials. It's basically asking your players what they liked and what they didn't like. Take their feedback, optimize, become better, use more tools, figure out what your playstyle is. You will become better in this hobby by doing it. That is the only way you become better. You can watch videos like this for people like me to transfer what we went through and what we think is cool, but at the end of the day, you need to figure out what works for your table, and that might be completely different than anything that everyone else is playing. So If you figure out that you don't like the rules and you don't like the initiative system and you don't like the way that role-playing works, you can change all of it. You're the game master, your players are your friends, you're sitting at the table, so go for it. Change everything. That is how we developed Redmark, by literally changing everything from Call of Cthulhu and finding out what works for our table, and now we're in love with it. The only metric, the only thing that you should listen is, are you and your players having fun? If your players are not having fun, you should be the one to encourage them, to tell you. They shouldn't feel bad for telling you, hey, this was kinda garbage. It will hurt, it's not a nice feeling, but learn from it and you will be better for it. And imagine how wildly crazy and amazing things you can make when you become better by doing. So that's all for me today. I know this was a very long video, but I think some useful things have been said. And if you like it, if you have your own tips, please leave a comment. That helps hack the algorithm and helps the channel. If you have any questions for me, link to our Discord is in the description. Come, ask away. We will do everything that we can to help you. And I hope to see you there or in the next video. But until then, I bid you
farewell, keepers.